Hello, friends. It is really one of my pleasures to sit down in front of the camera on my computer, knowing that I'm, in a sense, looking toward many of you, feeling toward you, speaking to you, speaking with you. It's actually a very creative and joyful thing for me to do. Today, I want to focus on something that's so foundational. And we live our lives just in a certain sense, kind of at the top level of the ocean. And we try to understand ourselves and our world in what that top, half a meter of the ocean is doing with its turbulence and its waves and its calmness. And then deep below, so much more, so much more, so much more. And of course, consciousness is like that. There's the very superficial surface level of consciousness, and then there are much deeper levels. By consciousness, I mean that which allows the arising within us of all of our perceptions, that which comes to us through our senses, all of the sensations that we experience in our bodies that I call part of the feeling mode of consciousness. And then the other primary mode of consciousness, besides feeling, the one that we're most aware of, we can use words like thinking or mentality or intellect but essentially the thinking mode of consciousness, a way of knowing which happens not for a baby or an infant because they haven't developed the ability to separate themselves from others. They haven't learned how to give names and labels to things. It's pre-verbal. We use that kind of expression. But when we develop the thinking mode of consciousness, that then seems to dominate our world. And thinking lives in the four dimensions of the four dynamics that I talk about in my writings and talks about the mandala of being. So thinking is essentially, remembering things from the past and based on that, anticipating the future. And then there is all of the thinking we have that is about ourselves, our internal judgments, our belief systems, the thought forms that we identify with. And then, because the me and you are inseparable, the subject and object of consciousness at that level are inseparable, we have the infinite, limitless thoughts about everyone and everything else. And so in that thinking mode of consciousness, we have architecture and art and science and literature and just about everything else that it takes words to express, all forms of communication at the level of utterance, at the level of speaking, or at the level of literacy in the form of writing. So there we are, two fundamental modes of consciousness, so very, very different. And yet it seems clear that the feeling mode of consciousness, which actually roots us, gives us information in the present moment about our state of being within ourselves, but at that level, that state of being is very much inseparable to the environment that we're in. The feeling mode of consciousness gives us a flash on what's happening in another. It changes when we're in the forest. It changes when we're on a mountaintop with the vast spaciousness of the views. That is the feeling mode, the feeling quality within us is shifting like music, like weather. When we're at the seaside staring at the ocean, or when you're really out at sea, as I once was years ago, crossing the Atlantic in a 16-meter sailboat with a bunch of friends. And, that changes the way you know things. Being in the forest, especially the older forests, I've had a few times the opportunities to spend time in. The old growth, which is now less than 1% of the forest left on the planet, practically, certainly in North America. So you get a sense then of the feeling mode of consciousness. Now, I know that the danger of the thinking mode of consciousness is that it is abstract. You start from an idea or a belief, and then even though we so prize logic and reason, there's a logic to racism. When people, and maybe some still do, put on the masks of that racist entity, the Ku Klux Klan, they have a logic to what they do. They have a logic, a rationale to why African American Negro people are intrinsically inferior in some way. They don't look at whether they're scared. They don't look at their own internal psychology. They create a judgment and a rationale on top of it. Economists do the same thing. They start from some abstracted idea about markets or corporations, giving identity to corporations similar to a human being, and then they build a logic of economic theory, economic deduction and reasoning. And yet, what does it start from? What does it really know? The success of the education of the mind, we all see it. And yet, have you ever seen the scale of the machines that are metallurgy and our engineering and our training, education has made possible so that these monsters go into forest and clear thousands and thousands of acres in a single day, just one organization, with very few men employed, but machines of enormous scale. You never see photos of them because if you actually saw them at work, you'd be sick. The people who see it are the people who protest the deforestation and certainly at times have put their lives on the line in front of the forces of providing forever forest materials for what? For the human way of life and for the wealth of a very small number of people. So that is the danger. The danger basically is that thinking mode of consciousness is heartless. What we can call the mind heart is not really a heart at all. If the mind has a thought, that thought, if it's an interpersonal thought, for example, he doesn't love me or she doesn't really care about me, that thought creates an emotion. That's not your deeper heart that you feel. What you feel is the emotional activation of the fear or the anxiety or the anger or the resentment created by that one simple thought. Multiply that by the thoughts that are going all the time, all day long, and you see that most people live in a body that is continuously aroused and activated by their thinking, but they never really feel deeply. That's what I meant earlier when I said, we live at the very surface of the ocean, this top half meter at best, which churns and swells up into enormous storms of emotional outrage. We've seen that tremendously in the United States in the politics of the recent election. And that kind of phenomenon is everywhere in the world. This superficiality of the emotional life of human beings, when it's only this spiral of mind, thinking, activating emotion, mind, thinking, activating emotion. And where is the feeling mode of consciousness? Where is it the deep knowing? How do we arrive at the deep knowing? That change that you feel at the ocean, on the top of the mountain, deep in the forest, walking in nature, or when you finally learn how to dive into the symphonic depths of your own being, the moods, the feeling, and begin to develop literacy in your own body. Literacy, feeling literacy, so that when you have a knowing in yourself, something you know in your own body, and then you build your premises that are actualized, activated, enacted, made possible by thinking, you're starting from something real. Now, feeling at that deepest level is real. You know when you smile at the giggle of a child, and you know the grief when there's loss, when someone you care for is suffering or dies. But there's even deeper levels of feeling. The ones that I'm talking about that are activated when we're near the sea or the forest, as we touch into different presentations of the majesty and magnificence of nature. So how do we mature our feeling mode of consciousness? We can't just go to nature to feel good. We can, but that's not going to be sufficient. We have to start to find a way to enter into our own bodies deeply enough. And I believe that happens, I know that happens through our relationships with other human beings, and particularly the relationship between male and female, man and woman. Now, I understand in today's reality that there are many aspects of gender identification. So I don't want to enter into that territory. I want to simply say that obviously the next generation of human life comes from the egg and the sperm of a woman and a man, of female and male. So you can say that the one, that is the life we mean when we say human, is actually made into a two, the male and the female. And then they dance side by side with each other. And there are potentials of familiarity, of caring and love that are beautiful. And then there are literally limitless, endless, unreachable dimensions of intimacy that we can share with each other. It's a path. It's one of the most profound paths. And I'll speak to it at some other time. I call it the path of third consciousness, of relational consciousness. But for the purpose of what I'm describing now, think about it. If you truly are going to become mature, go deeper than the ocean, that top half meter of the ocean, the churning emotions that are directly activated by your thinking, or images that you react to and then think about, which then gives you a whole emotional reaction, arousal reaction, you realize that if we are going to deepen into this deeper ground of feeling, the obstacles to that inside of us force every single one of us to start to look at how we've closed our hearts, how we've become self-involved, how we, men, for example, have a deep call to the mystery of women. I believe women have the same thing with men. But speaking as a man and an observer of men and working with men and following and looking at history, take a man like the current president of the United States, Donald Trump. You can see with his wives, his sequence of wives, something inside of him wants something from them. But I know he's unable to receive that. So what he can do is have children with them. What he can do is own them. What he can do is minister them with his money and his genitals. And they can minister to him in some similar ways, but no real deep intimacy. Look at the body language of Donald Trump and Melania Trump. And you see immediately, for example, if you contrast it with the body language of Barack and Michelle Obama, or you contrast it with the body language of Joe Biden and Jill Biden, and you know something about what these people are capable of feeling, in this case the Obamas and the Bidens, and what Donald Trump and Melania are incapable of feeling. And the difference that means about Melania's depth of engagement of the feminine, female principle inside of herself, and likewise that the depth of the male principle inside of Donald Trump, uninformed by the female way of knowing, the female way of perceiving and seeing, the female way of being, because he can't let it in. His maleness is extremely superficial. It has none of the feminine that allows the sense of community and connection and intuition and empathy and compassion. It's just absent in him. And he's just an icon for that, for the world to look at right now, an extreme of it. And because he is such an extreme of it, he's such an important figure for our time in that way. In the failure, not of Donald Trump, we look at him always Donald Trump, but he's one side of the one that became two. There's something damaged in his ability to receive the feminine. And he chooses women who may also have something damaged in them in terms of being able to receive and be activated by the masculine. And maleness and femaleness, and they are different modes, not only in the conceptual world of thinking, but deep down in the feeling mode. And it's only when we start to go into intimacy and we see, why is it hard for me to let in and surrender and open myself to intimacy as a man, as a woman? What is it about my childhood that did that? What is it about Christianity? What is it about worshiping a disembodied God? What is it about talking about spirit, which is disembodied, therefore disconnected from feeling? What is pure Christianity except an attempt to reach some disembodied state? It took to 1958 to include any kind of female up there with God and the Son of God in that Christian pantheon. Mother Mary, but she's a mother. Where is her sexuality? Where is her deeply, she's a mother, she's mercy, she's compassion, she's empathy, but she's not a real deep vitalness that we would imagine if you take sort of a medley of an amalgamation of some of the Greek goddesses, Aphrodite and Athena. Now you got a handful of woman, female, mystery, feeling. And what a dance for men and women to do that. So this deepening of the feeling nature starts when we essentially look at what paralyzes or cripples feeling literacy. And that is fear. And so we must learn a relationship to fear. And fear has layers. And anxiety. These are not just things to be rejected. These aren't the niggers of our inner psychology. These are the places where, as we engage them with conscious awareness, we develop feeling literacy. We develop a depth of feeling in ourselves. And without that, we can't tune in to the deeper source of feeling intelligence, the kind of extraordinary morality that is the natural order, the relationship in nature of everything to everything else. Now, I'm not saying nature feels that. We may, human beings, be the first creatures emerging from nature in the evolutionary dynamic of nature that can feel the living morality, the highest of all moralities, that is the morality of nature itself. And if we can feel that, then our thinking starts to become a servant of something magnificent, something. Science shows us pieces of it, gives us a sense of how everything's related to everything else, but science in itself doesn't feel. A scientific paper has no feeling in it. A scientist themselves may have passion for what they do, but does that passion then ride over into looking at and saying, what am I actually living at home with my husband and wife? Because the relationship emotionally at the feeling level of a mother to children or a father to children is beautiful and magnificent, but it is not the depth that happens between man and woman, male and female, or the depth you reach in yourself as you begin to be able to feel the moral integrity of nature, which then we would have to become in service to. We couldn't not do that. And so the logic, the rationale of our thinking would start from that integrity, that morality. And human morality will then seem trivial because human beings at the level of thinking will manipulate morality. And it will become moral to destroy nature so that I can, raise cattle and make money to feed my children. That's moral. Of course it is. At the human level, it's so superficial. So sadly, the top half meter, and in some instances, the top quarter meter, inches of the ocean of being. And so this need for us to deepen feeling literacy, feeling intelligence through relationship, in order for us to come home to our relationship to nature and start becoming obedient to her and in service to her for our own sakes. This is the cusp we are on in human evolution. And so when you meditate, don't meditate to escape. The notion of self-realization, I'll talk about that at another time, is a mistake. It's a mistake. In order to deepen in this feeling literacy so that our thinking becomes intelligent, really intelligent, because it has a ground underneath it that is real, we have to meditate in a way that takes us into our bodies and makes us want to understand and enter into and engage and stop running from fear. And we do that through relationship primarily. I stop now. Reflect on these things, feel into these things, take a look at your own relationships, look at your meditative practice. Is it about getting peaceful? Is it about getting still? Yes, that's good, but then stillness for what? To what end? Not the failed idea of reaching some unitive consciousness. If the unitive consciousness were enough, it wouldn't have become male and female. And believe me, the people that are on a path of unitive consciousness, a large number of them that I've met, are completely failed at the level of feeling literacy and the capacity for actual relationships. Enough for today. My pleasure and my privilege to share with you.